I thank the House. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull right to say it is, to quote him, inconceivable that a Prime Minister's office would not be told about a reported rape 50 metres from his office?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, Mr Turnbull, of course, is entitled to his opinion on these matters, and I at all times seek to show great respect to former Prime Ministers, Mr Speaker, and I'll do so again here today. But as former Prime Ministers would know, that Prime Ministers are aware of certain facts of these matters, and, Mr Speaker, the facts in these matters demonstrate, as they've been reported to me, that Brittany had made a decision that she did not wish to make a statement and register a complaint with the police, and that Minister Reynolds and others respected that decision. And as a result of respecting that decision and her agency in this matter, then as a result that matter progressed no further, and clearly did not progress further for quite a considerable period of time until most recently, when Brittany made the statements that she said, that she has made, and we have responded to those statements now. And as we've said in this place on many occasions in these last few days, it is shattering, and we need to address it, and we indeed shall.
The member for Groom.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister explain to the House how the Morrison government's economic recovery plan and the delivery of COVID-19 vaccines will work to assist our recovery from the pandemic and support Australians and businesses, including in my electorate of Groom, to create more opportunities for themselves?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Groom for his first question in this place, and can I commend him on his maiden speech in this place as well, Mr Speaker, so eloquently articulating the great principles and values of the LNP and the Liberal Party, and we look forward to his great contributions in this place. He's off to a cracking start, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, Australia's economic recovery, our economic comeback, is underway, and it continues to gather momentum. We are emerging from the COVID-19 recession in a way, frankly, that few countries, particularly advanced economies, are around the world. When you consider the United Kingdom last year saw the size of their economy fall by 10%. Other large industrialised nations like France and Canada and others up in the 9%, 7% range, and even the United States at over 3%, Mr Speaker. It is not just the case that Australia has had an impressive response to the pandemic from a health perspective in responding to that crisis, but it has also been true on the economic response that has ensured that Australians have been able to have greater confidence about their job security and their economic future as we have worked to deliver the response. 520,000 businesses are no longer on JobKeeper requiring taxpayer-funded support. More than 2 million Australians are no longer needing that taxpayer-funded income support that was there when they needed to get them through the worst part of the crisis. 90% of the jobs that had been lost through the course of the COVID-19 recession have returned, Mr Speaker. There is record workforce participation rising above the pre-pandemic levels, and confidence is being restored. And that confidence will be further reinforced, Mr Speaker, by the rollout of the vaccination program, Mr Speaker, and the vaccination strategy, which, Mr Speaker, has been prepared by the experts, the medical experts in this country, and is rolling out, Mr Speaker, from Monday. Following that expert advice, Mr Speaker. It is in its final touches, the final strokes of that preparation now, Mr Speaker, as it prepares to be commenced on Monday. It is ready to go, Mr Speaker, and I know we all join together in this place to encourage Australians to listen to that expert advice, to gather the information that has been provided from those official sources so they can confidently go about receiving that vaccine in accordance with the strategy which begins with those those on the front line and those most vulnerable first. But the economic recovery continues also with the rollout of the many programs and plans, whether it's the Home Builder program and the jobs it's creating, the $250 billion that has been put into balance sheets, which has been unlocked by the confidence that is returning to the Australian economy, and infrastructure like the second-range crossing up there into Woomera.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
You're right. Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Brittany Higgins said that the Prime Minister's principal private secretary checked in on her, including after the Four Corners episode at the end of last year, reportedly with a WhatsApp call. Does the Prime Minister accept Brittany Higgins' account?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I refer to the answer I gave on this matter yesterday, and the advice I have is that that was the first time that I indicated yesterday that my office became aware of those issues, and I've engaged with the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to verify that advice.
The member for Braddon.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government will help ensure access to COVID-19 vaccine for all Australians across urban, rural and remote areas?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Braddon, in particular for his help at a time of critical need in northwest Tasmania last year when there was a significant outbreak. AUSMAT and the ADF were on the ground. He was playing an important role in providing public information, coordination and confidence to the community. And Australia has done very well by comparison with the great work and scenes of the pandemic around the world over the last year. We know that we have seen in the last 24 hours over 340,000 cases and almost 10,000 lives lost. By comparison, we are at 0 cases of community transmission again nationwide today. And at the same time, there are 0 Australians in ICU with COVID-19. And so our containment measures, whilst always being challenged, are strong and holding up. And there will be days when there will be other cases. But against that pandemic background, the critical thing is now to move to the next phase of ensuring that we roll out the vaccines. And that vaccine begins on Monday. And what that does is it means that we begin with the first of the 150 million vaccines that are available to Australians. We now have the Pfizer and AstraZeneca approvals, and we begin with the rollout of the Pfizer vaccines as part of Phase 1A. And that means that the first group of people across Australia to receive the vaccines will include the elderly, our aged care and disability residents and our aged care and disability carers. We will be taking the vaccine to them through our outreach workforce. We are also supporting, through our hubs, the quarantine workers and the border protection workers as a priority identified by the states. In addition to that, we are providing outreach to ensure that through our hubs there will be support for our frontline health workers who've played such a heroic role. This phase will take 6 weeks. The aged care workers, for example, will be in rural and regional Australia. They'll be in urban Australia. Our aged care residents in rural, regional and urban Australia. We will work through all of them, beginning in every state and territory in country and city areas. As we move to Phase 1B, we'll move to our over 80s, our over 70s, and we'll have our immunocompromised and Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal and community-controlled health organisations, general practices around the country, the support of pharmacies subsequently around the country, and in addition to that, vaccination clinics. All of these are about providing access to Australians everywhere.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Defence Minister's former acting Chief of Staff was the primary point of contact regarding the reported rape of Brittany Higgins. That staff member worked in the Prime Minister's office before and after the reported incident, and she's now back in the Prime Minister's office. Does the Prime Minister stand by his statement yesterday that his office only became aware of the rape on Friday?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I do. That's my advice, Mr Speaker. I do, Mr Speaker. If someone has worked in another office, they've been bound by the issues in that office, Mr Speaker, and particularly when they're working in an office of a sensitive nature in the defence portfolio, Mr Speaker, and it is not common practice, in my understanding, that when staff move between offices, that they disclose matters of other offices, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, it is my advice that that our office became aware of this issue on the 12th of February of this year.
Just before I call the next question, just to those interjecting, I'm trying to listen very carefully to the question and the answer to check that both are in order. I'll deal very swiftly with those interjecting. I really want to make that clear now. The member for Mayo has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Prime Minister, Brittany Higgins is not the first employee in the parliament to make serious allegations of sexual assault or inappropriate behaviour in the workplace. Today, the crossbench wrote to you, the Leader of the Opposition and the presiding officers, calling for an urgent external review of current procedures and practice and the formation of an independent body to oversee future complaints. Prime Minister, will you restore confidence in the parliament and support an independent external review and an external independent body?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, the short answer to that question is yes, Mr Speaker, and that's what I indicated yesterday. And I thank the members of the crossbench for their letter, Mr Speaker, as I do the suggestion from the Leader of the Opposition. I met with the member for Indi earlier today, and amongst many other important matters that we discussed today, those especially relating to her electorate in Indi, we discussed this matter as well. And the matters that have been raised in the letter from the crossbench are matters that the independent inquiry should indeed address. And there is some overlap between the issues raised in your suggestions, as has been raised by the Leader of the Opposition. I would stress that I don't think we should presume to the conclusions of what that review should be and what it may recommend and what is the best way, because this is ultimately what this is about. What is the best way that we can ensure that people who work in this place can get the supports that they need in the most extreme of circumstances, as has been the subject of the matters we've been addressing here over the course of this week, or frankly in the more routine of matters in relation to their own employment. And so I think it is a useful process to do that. These most terrible events that we've been talking about this week, as we know, these are events that can occur in. They're not peculiar to any one employer in this place or any one party in this place. And it is about changing the environment, and I would think that all members are committed to that, and I would assume that, I think, in a spirit of good faith. And as a result, this inquiry should reflect that good intent, and I will ensure that it does. And I've written, as I mentioned, coming into the chamber to you today and the other members of the crossbench, and indeed in the Senate, as well as to the Leader of the Opposition, and you'll have that correspondence. And I look forward to that being finalised as soon as possible.
The member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is driving Australia's economic recovery and creating jobs through the rollout of our $2 billion road safety program?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I do thank the member for Mallee for her question and acknowledge her role in advocating for road safety in her electorate in regional Victoria. Peter Brewer in the Canberra Times wrote this today. Drivers were drug-affected, alcohol-affected and speeding right through last year's pandemic in the ACT, despite more police out patrolling Canberra's roads. That's awful. Mr Speaker, there was a dreadful accident 15 kilometres north of Wagga Wagga yesterday morning, just before 5, on the Coolaman Road. New South Wales Ambulance Officer Inspector Eamon Purcell, a local, had this to say. It is a testament to technology and the design of cars these days that the injuries we're seeing in these types of incidents are quite less severe than we used to. This was a tragedy. A gentleman died. 2 others were severely injured, but at least with the modern vehicle they were in, they were protected. And we have more police on our roads. We have better vehicles, and we are certainly investing in better roads. Investing in better roads makes for saving lives. Improving road safety is a key priority of our government, our parliament. Our $110 billion investment in infrastructure is creating 100,000 jobs, and I was certainly very pleased that today, with the Assistant Minister for Road Safety, the member for Wright, the first Victorian projects under Tranche 1 of the Commonwealth's $2 billion road safety program was announced. $183 million of Australian government funding has been approved for road safety improvements such as road shoulder sealing, rumble strips, safety barriers and intersection upgrades. Across Victoria, I spoke to the Shadow Minister, the member for Ballarat, about the funding in her electorate last night. There will be work undertaking to improve the safety for vulnerable road users. And the member for Melbourne will be very interested to know, such as separating cyclists and pedestrians from vehicle traffic. In the member's electorate of Maryley, we're starting work on shoulder sealing and rumble strips for the Ballarat-Maryborough Road, the Wimmera Highway and the Sunraysia Highway, roads that are important linkage points for so much of the activity in Mallee. Brian Barry, the Manangatang Victorian Farmers Federation branch president, said of one of the roads being upgraded in Mallee, the road between Sea Lake and Manangatang has received minimal work since being constructed in 1967. This road is vital for local communities, providing a major freight link during harvest, with the federal government providing funding to improve safety for all users, with the sealing of shoulders meaning safer trips for residents who rely on this road. Now, our funding is under a use-it or lose-it basis, meaning these projects need to start and finish before 30 June this year, and the state's future funding, if that doesn't happen, then will be allocated to another state. It's getting on with the job, saving lives and creating jobs.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the maximum sentence in the Australian Capital Territory for a rape is more than 10 years. What are the existing protocols and procedures in your office when someone becomes aware a serious crime may have been committed by a ministerial staffer? Were these followed in relation to the reported rape of Brittany Higgins?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I also refer to the statements made by Senator Reynolds in the Senate yesterday, where she said she sought and followed advice from ministerial and parliamentary services regarding the support available. And, as she said, she was at pains to ensure that Brittany felt empowered to determine how she was to handle the matter, and that remains the case. Now, Mr Speaker, the issue here in this terrible incident is that at the time this occurred, there was a security breach that was involved, and that was the matter that was addressed at the time. And indeed, there was a staff member whose employment was terminated as a result of that security breach. At that time, there was no advice, certainly to our office, that this incident involved any alleged sexual assault. Whether an alleged sexual assault is taken to the next stage and is to be advised to the police for a matter for investigation, then that is the decision of that person, in this case, Brittany, but in any other case, whoever that may be. And so it is up to them to have the power of the decision as to how that should proceed. Now, in that case, I'm advised that the minister encouraged her to take that matter to the police, Mr Speaker. She was encouraged to do that. She chose at that point not to do that, and that is why the matter sat for as long as it did. Now, I accept, as I listened to Brittany the other night, that her views about that, of course, have changed over a period of time, and that is also totally understandable and totally okay. But, Mr Speaker, to suggest that the government or that a minister or anyone here should have acted against the wishes as expressed to them at the time, Mr Speaker, and subsequently about this matter, then, Mr Speaker, that would be against the advice that we have received as to how such matters should be handled.
Just before I call the member for Stirling, I'd like to inform the House we have present in the gallery this afternoon His Excellency Mr Wolfgang Lucas Strohmeyer, Ambassador of Austria. On behalf of the House, a very warm welcome to you. And I call the member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer please inform the House how the Morrison government's strong stewardship of our economy is making Australia one of the best-positioned countries in the world to recover from the global COVID-19 recession?
The Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Stirling for his service in the Australian Defence Force, Mr Speaker, and for his work in the corporate sector and for supporting policies in this place that has delivered tax cuts to more than 70,000 members of his electorate, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, he, like others on this side of the House, understand that the Australian economy is recovering strongly from the biggest hit to our economy since the Great Depression, Mr Speaker. The biggest hit since the Great Depression, with the first pandemic in a century. Now, today I can inform the House that job ads were up for a 9th consecutive month, Mr Speaker, a 9th consecutive month. Job ads have doubled since April. Yesterday I informed the House that payroll jobs data for the fortnight was up by 1.3%, and across all states and territories were up and back to the level it was a year ago. Mr Speaker, on Monday I informed the House that the JobKeeper data for the December quarter was in from the ATO, which showed that 2.1 million Australians had graduated from JobKeeper, and 520,000 Australian businesses had come off JobKeeper in the December quarter compared to the period prior. And in the great state of Western Australia, that fall was 70%. In South Australia, it was 67%. In Tasmania, it was 65%. In Queensland, it was 64%. In New South Wales, it was 60%, Mr Speaker, and in Victoria, it was 44%. But that were the number of people coming off JobKeeper in the December quarter. We've also seen consumer and business confidence recover to its pre-pandemic levels. We've seen a strong take-up of the home builder program, more than 80,000 applications. We saw more than 80,000 motor vehicle sales in January alone, up 10% year on year, helping to be driven by the instant asset write-off, Mr Speaker. This is what's happening on our work sites, in our car yards, Mr Speaker, on the building sites, Mr Speaker. Jobs are coming back and economic activity is increasing. Now, I know in the member for Stirling's electorate he's got lots of graduates of JobKeeper, including Wayne Bowen, who's got 3 surf shops in Scarborough, Mr Speaker. Now, he had, I think, 14 people who were on JobKeeper, 14 staff on JobKeeper at 3 surf shops, all of which have graduated. So if you want to right away, get aboard, go down to see Wayne at Scarborough, Mr Speaker. Just like yesterday, we were speaking about Jack's Tyres in Mitchelton in the electorate of Ryan. If you want to go and get your tyre, a new set of wheels, go down and see Dean, and he will look after you, Mr Speaker. This is the economy bit.
The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How many of the 1.3 million Australians still on JobKeeper will lose their jobs when the payment is cut?
The Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, what I can inform the honourable member is that on Treasury's numbers that we put out in my EFO is that when JobKeeper ends, the unemployment rate will continue to come down, Mr Speaker. Will come down. So we will see job creation in this country even after the end of JobKeeper. And if the honourable member had managed to read the Reserve Bank Governor's speech—
The Treasurer will resume his seat. The member for Rankin on a point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. Very specific question. Relevance. Very specific question. How many of the 1.3 million will lose their job when he cuts JobKeeper?
And I just say to the Treasurer, it was a very specific question, and he needs to confine himself to the question. But I also say the reason I hadn't intervened is the Treasurer had been on his feet 28 seconds. So I'm just... But
well, Mr Speaker, in the December quarter there were just over 1.5 million on JobKeeper. It is Treasury's expectation. So it's an assertion by the member for Rankin that there will be 1.3 million people in the March quarter. We don't yet have that data. So the member for Rankin can't assert that number. What I can tell the member for Rankin, it is Treasury's expectation and the RBA's expectation that the unemployment rate...
Thank you. Members on my left, it's impossible to hear the Treasurer when they're interjecting. Seems an irony that I get points of order on relevance and then I'm prevented from hearing the answer. The member for Longman.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's support for small businesses is restoring confidence and helping them to create jobs for our recovery from the COVID-19 and a stronger Australia?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question and note that he, like many of us, has run a successful small business and he knows the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. And of course the pandemic has thrown up so many more challenges for our small and family businesses. But, Mr Speaker, our government has always been determined to support small and family businesses, to back 3.5 million small and family businesses right across this country, because it's many of those who have borne the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's them that have really borne the brunt of the economic challenges that we have all faced over the last 12 months. Now, Mr Speaker, small business is the lifeblood of our communities. They support many of our local community groups, they support our sporting organisations, and very often they're the place that our young people get their first jobs. Now, these can be businesses like one of the businesses in the member for Longman's electorate, RGS at Narangba. Now, they're a manufacturing business. They were established by the Gripsky family more than 30 years ago, and they manufacture and distribute a range of outdoor power equipment, including aftermarket spares for things such as lawnmowers, chainsaws, brush cutters, trimmers and small engines. They are a 100% Australian-owned family business, and they have gone from 120 employees to 138 in the last 6 months. Now, I met with Paul Gripsky and his team, along with the member for Longman, and toured their factory late last year. They have some really big plans to grow their business into the future, and that includes onshoring more manufacturing and building Aussie-made lawnmowers. They have literally powered through the pandemic, and they're one of many businesses right around this country that is planning for the future with confidence. And in fact, Mr Speaker, the NAB survey of SMEs found that business confidence in the last quarter of 2020 reached its highest level since the survey began in 2006. So confidence about profitability, trading and employment were all back in positive territory, which is absolutely extraordinary given the year that we have just had. Over 90% of small business loan deferrals from the peak of the pandemic are now being repaid again. And importantly, businesses are graduating off JobKeeper. They've adapted and they've adjusted to the challenges of the last 12 months. They are looking at how they are going to grow their businesses. And, Mr Speaker, every small business across Australia knows that the coalition government has their back.
Member for Barton. Shouldn't say that about the member for Rankin. Member for Rankin has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer, and I refer to his earlier answer. How will the government's cuts to JobKeeper, cuts to wages, cuts to super and a budget riddled with rorts help the 100,000 people that the Treasury expects to lose their jobs after JobKeeper is cut?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, unfortunately for the member for Rankin, he doesn't listen closely enough to the Secretary of the Treasury's testimony, nor to the RBA Governor, because this is what the Secretary of the Treasury said with respect to the end of JobKeeper, and he asked specifically about the Secretary of the Treasury. He said, "I don't expect it." He said, "Yes, I don't expect it to disturb the trajectory of the unemployment rate coming down and more employment being generated over the year." Now, that's a pretty clear statement. Now, the Governor of the Reserve Bank was asked the question at his speech at the press club the other day, Mr Speaker. He was asked about the end of JobKeeper, and he says, "Am I disappointed the government is stopping the JobKeeper program?" His answer? No, Mr Speaker, no. In fact, the Governor of the Reserve Bank has said job vacancies, job ads and business hiring intentions have all rebounded sharply, which suggests continuing solid employment growth over the months ahead. Now, I also want to explain to the member for Rankin that the Treasury did a review of JobKeeper last year, and originally this program was for 6 months. The Morrison government extended it for another 6 months. Now, Mr Speaker, the Treasury did a review in which it said about the JobKeeper program. It says JobKeeper has a number of features that create adverse incentives which may become more pronounced over the time as the economy recovers. It dampens incentives to work, it hampers labour mobility and the reallocation of workers to more productive roles. It keeps businesses afloat that would not be viable without ongoing support. Now, Mr Speaker, that's a key quote from the Treasury in their advice to government, because we know that the economy is strengthening. We know that we have avoided 15% unemployment, and unemployment today is at 6.6%. We know that the participation rate is at a record high. We know business and consumer confidence is coming back to its pre-pandemic levels. We know in the housing market, in terms of motor vehicle sales, it's strong. I've talked about this week, talking about the number of people who have come off JobKeeper, the payroll jobs data. Today, job ads up for a 9th consecutive month. Mr Speaker, this all points to an economic recovery, and that goes to the heart of what Treasury's advice to this government has been about JobKeeper ending. It's a temporary program. So, Mr Speaker, the honourable member for Rankin has never seen a tax he doesn't want to impose and never seen a spending policy that he doesn't like. We, on the other hand, have very considered policies based on the medical advice. He's shouting again. No one's listening. We're getting on with the job of creating jobs.
Member for Rankin. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is ensuring that families and business, including in my electorate of Lindsay, have access to the affordable, reliable power they rely on as we continue our recovery from the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lindsay for her question. And
Member
can
for
I
McMahon.
Can I pay tribute in particular to her outstanding work in this place and in her electorate on local manufacturing, Mr Speaker. She's a great champion of manufacturing in this country, and like all of us on this side of the House, she knows that a strong Australia means having secure, affordable, reliable power in this country, Mr Speaker. And as we recover from the coronavirus pandemic, that's more important than ever. More important than ever. We heard that last week when we were together at the Australian Arms Hotel in Penrith, Mr Speaker, where we announced a $10 million program to support energy efficiency in small hotels right across Australia, Mr Speaker, to invest in critical initiatives like energy efficiency through refrigeration, improved refrigeration, air conditioning and so on. Now, Mr Speaker, this is part of our plan for affordable, reliable energy for Western Sydney and for all of Australia, and our plan is working, Mr Speaker. Our plan is working. 17 consecutive months of wholesale price reductions in electricity in this country, which started to fall well before COVID-19. It began when we introduced the Big Stick legislation, which those opposite finally agreed to. A 9% reduction last year a 9% reduction last year alone in the CPI for electricity prices, Mr Speaker. 8 consecutive quarters of CPI reductions year on year in electricity prices, completely unprecedented in the records we have, Mr Speaker. And today we've announced the latest reduction in default market offers. Now, default market offer is the price cap which families and small businesses get access to if they don't negotiate a market price. And the latest reductions will see a reduction in standing offers by up to 7.9% for families and 8.5% for small businesses. So that means for a family in St Mary's a reduction in their bill of typically $800 a year, Mr Speaker. A cafe in Penrith, $6,000 a year better off since we introduced the default market offer, and a hairdresser in Emu Plains, $4,000 a year better off, Mr Speaker. Lower electricity prices means more money in the pockets of Australian households and businesses at a critical time, Mr Speaker. We on this side of the House are getting on with affordable, reliable power for all Australians.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that his industrial relations legislation will leave no worker worse off?
The Prime Minister.
Our industrial relations legislation is designed to get Australians back into jobs, which will leave them better off, Mr Speaker, and to be in a growing economy where people will be better off, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Labor Party does not have a policy to create one job, Mr Speaker, but he's got plenty of interest in keeping his own, Mr Speaker. Our policies are designed to create jobs, whether it's in industrial relations, whether it's supporting the manufacturing industry, whether it's building safer roads, Mr Speaker, whether it's getting home builder on the ground and seeing people getting their first home, whether it's getting lower energy prices, Mr Speaker, and investing in the science and the technology to deliver the energy resources that we need for heavy industry in the regions. Mr Speaker, our recovery plan is working.
The Prime Minister resume his seat. The Prime Minister's indicated he's concluded the answer. The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government is providing Australia's policing and security agencies the resources they need to keep Australians safe?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and for the great interest she takes in making sure that we can keep our country safe. Mr Speaker, this government has managed the budget well, which means that we can afford to make a more significant investment into our agencies, not just ASIO, but the AFP, the ABF, AUSTRAC and others. And, Mr Speaker, since August of 2014, the government has boosted funding for our law enforcement, intelligence and security agencies by more than $2.3 billion. Mr Speaker, the resourcing that we've put into ASIO and to the Australian Federal Police's capacity to support the states and territories to prevent and respond to terrorism through multi-agency joint counter-terrorism teams across the country has resulted in, to date, 128 people having been charged as a result of 59 counter-terrorism-related operations around the country. And we know that the threat from terrorism is with us and will remain with us for a very long period of time. We also know, Mr Speaker, that levels of espionage in our country are now at greater levels than we saw in the peak of the Cold War. We are taking decisive action again to protect our sovereignty, as we must, and we've boosted ASIO's budget to the highest level in its 70-year history. Mr Speaker, I'm also very proud of the fact that we've been able to put in almost $70 million to the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, because our highest priority is to make sure that we protect Australian children. And since the formation of the ACE, the Centre has received over 40,000 reports of child abuse material, resulting in just over 1,150 referrals to Australian law enforcement agencies. Most importantly, Mr Speaker, 113 Australian children have now been removed from harm through the work of that centre. Through the pandemic, as Australians have spent more time online, so too have the Australian Federal Police. And I want to send a very clear message to those who are operating on the dark web, those who are operating on encrypted messaging apps such as operated by Facebook and others, who regularly are trading videos and images of children being sexually exploited and abused, that the Australian Federal Police now has a much greater presence as a result of our investment online to make sure that they can protect those children. So people who think that they are operating on the dark web and that they won't be detected, they need to recognise that the technology being deployed now by the Australian Federal Police and our agencies and our law enforcement partners, both here and internationally, is at a record high. We are not hesitating in adopting new technologies so that we can expose those people online that would seek to do significant harm and to destroy the lives of those young children.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is again addressed to the Prime Minister, and I ask, will the Prime Minister take the second chance that he's been given during this question time to guarantee that his industrial relations legislation will leave no worker worse off?
The Leader, the Prime Minister.
It's the Minister for Industrial Relations to add further to the answer, Mr Speaker. But as I say again, our industrial relations changes are designed to help more Australians get into work and to ensure that Australians are better off, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition seems to be living in a fantasy land when he speaks of these matters as if we aren't coming out of a COVID-19 recession, Mr Speaker. He seems to misunderstand that job security today is about having a stronger economy that's supported by businesses creating jobs, Mr Speaker, and that is what our plans are designed to achieve.
The Prime Minister resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. It goes to relevance. The Prime Minister's now had a number of minutes to think of an answer to, will he guarantee that his industrial relations will leave no worker worse off? It's a simple guarantee if he believes he can give it.
And as I said yesterday, the difficulty is with questions that ask for yes-no answers, essentially. So the Prime Minister's being relevant to the policy, and he's the Prime Minister.
I'll pass over to the Minister for Industrial Relations, but I'll say again to the Leader of the Opposition, Australians are seeking the job security of an economy that is recovering from the COVID-19 recession. And, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition Mr Speaker, seems to not understand what job security means when you're coming out of a COVID-19 recession. Australian workers know that under the economic policies of our government, they have greater confidence about their job, they have greater confidence about being better off, they have greater confidence about their future because of the economic policies of our government that are giving them that job security, and that includes the changes that we are making to industrial relations arrangements. But I'll ask the Minister to add further.
The Leader of the House and Minister for Industrial Relations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister and the members of the opposition, and their claims that anyone would be worse off under the government's bill are absolutely 100% wrong. And in fact, I think it was fascinating to read the characterisation of that in the Australian Financial Review by Philip Curry yesterday, where he said this, Mr Speaker. Mr Burke said other measures in the bill would also enable wages and conditions to be cut, but he offered no detail to back his claim. And that's because there is no detail. There is only one side of politics in Australia that has policy plans that will make workers worse off, and that is the Labor Party. And they are on clear display in both versions of the Leader of the Opposition's speech. And in version number 1 that he provided to the media, the Leader of the Opposition said this. He said, Labor government that I will lead—
the Leader of the Opposition resume his seat. He's taken a point of order on relevance already, but the Minister for Industrial Relations was not asked about alternative policies. He was only asked about his policy, and he needs to confine himself to that.
And as that has been answered more than sufficiently, I think, Mr Speaker, I completely understand why they don't want their policy spoken about.
The member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General.
Will the Attorney-General inform the House how the Morrison government's foreign interference laws are working to keep Australians safe?
The Attorney-General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question and his great interest in this area. And since coming to government in 2013, we have passed more than 20 tranches of national security legislation, Mr Speaker, and of those, none have been more important and more complicated than the laws passed to deal with foreign adversaries and any foreign entity that would act in a way that was adverse to Australian interests to benefit their own interests. And it's quite clear, we see it very often, that we continue to face unprecedented levels of foreign activity in Australia, and indeed that has been described at various times as a level of activity that exceeds that even that Australia experienced at the height of the Cold War. The Director-General of ASIO rightly observed in his annual report last year, and these are his words, that while terrorism is a threat to life, espionage and foreign interference represent threats to our way of life. Foreign governments are seeking information about Australia's capabilities, its research, its technology, its domestic and its foreign policy. And that is why, under this government, we completely rewrote the antiquated espionage and secrecy offence laws in Australia. We introduced Australia's first ever offences for foreign interference. We established the first foreign influence transparency scheme. And last year we passed amendments to the ASIO Act, which extended their critical compulsory questioning framework to apply to espionage and foreign interference. And these reforms have been absolutely critical. They've been very necessary, and my task today is to inform the House that they are working. And as members are aware, on 5 November last year, an individual from Melbourne was formally charged with the offence of preparing for a foreign interference offence, contrary to section 92.4 of the Criminal Code. That is the first time that someone has been charged in Australia with a foreign interference offence. These, of course, are the same laws that the Director-General of ASIO has previously noted, and again these are his words, have caused discomfort and possibly pain for foreign intelligence services, and that have made it more difficult for them to operate in Australia. And with respect to our foreign influence transparency scheme, we've continued to see a very steady number of registrations. As of 10 February 2021, there were 199 activities registered on behalf of 33 jurisdictions. And of course there is no problem with being registered. That's what we expect, and registrations represent entities as diverse as those from the United States, China and Japan. Of course, what we do not expect and will not tolerate is failing to register those types of activities that should be registered. And I can also inform the House that the enforcement powers that exist under the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme register are now on the steady increase in terms of their use. Those information-gathering powers that can be activated by the Secretary of my department have experienced a 5-fold increase in their use from the last time in which I updated the House, and these are positive developments.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the conflicting answers given to my last question. Now that the Minister for Industrial Relations has been prepared to guarantee that the industrial relations legislation will leave no worker worse off, will the Prime Minister give the same guarantee that his legislation will leave no worker worse off?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I completely reject the assertion that has just been made by the Leader of the Opposition.
Members on my left.
Those on that side may be used to him verballing people on that side, Mr Speaker, but on this side, Mr Speaker, we don't put up with that sort of thing. They might put up with it in the Labor Party and the union moving. They might put up with that, but, Mr Speaker, those who believe in individual liberties on this side of the House,
Prime Minister will resume
Speaker,
his seats. Members will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. There is a thing called Hansard, Mr Speaker, and I refer the Prime Minister to that. He needs to be relevant to the question, which is very specific. We're after the same answer that the Industrial Relations Minister gave, or not. It's a decision for him. But abuse of me is not relevant to the answer.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Members on my right. Members on my right. The Prime Minister, obviously, yes, he was asked a very specific question and he rejected the assertion in the question. So I'm listening to the Prime Minister, but he does have to be relevant to the question that was asked.
Mr. Speaker, I'll leave the criticism of the Leader of the Opposition to those who sit behind him. They're very good at it, Mr. Speaker, and they're very enthusiastic about it and not too shy or subtle. But, Mr. Speaker, I reject the assertion of the question, Mr. Speaker. I reject the assertion made by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker. The statements made by the Minister and I are entirely consistent.
The member for Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education and Youth. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is safeguarding Australians from foreign interference in our universities and protecting government-funded research from being compromised?
The Minister for Education and Youth.
For Curtin for her question. As members might know, she's a former law professor, a university vice-chancellor herself before coming to this place, so brings enormous experience to this parliament. Mr. Speaker, as the Attorney-General just noted a moment ago, we are seeing foreign interference levels in this country today which are higher than at any time that we saw during the Cold War. And that interference goes across all aspects of our community, and unfortunately universities and research sector are also part of that. Now, Mr. Speaker, universities are targeted because they're often working on the development of key technologies, of medicines and practices that are fundamental to the future of Australia's economy, our military capabilities and indeed our security. And of course, when this is compromised, it can cause significant and long-term damage to Australia. And as ASIO has noted to the Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, there are many examples already where we have seen foreign actors interfering or attempting to interfere with the university sector. For example, they noted that researchers and their families have been threatened, coerced or intimidated by actors seeking to have their sensitive research provided to a foreign state. Some universities have been threatened through financial coercion should critical research continue. There are instances where academics have self-censored their course materials in order to avoid cuts to foreign funding. And there have been attempts to steal sensitive material as part of cyber security compromises. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is completely unacceptable, and the government is taking very strong action to combat these threats. We've already invested $145 million in combating foreign interference, including $1.6 million to strengthen cybersecurity in universities. Since 2020, we've put more requirements on research grants to the Australian Research Council, and as you may have seen on the front page of The Australian today, 5 such grants were knocked back on national security grounds at the end of last year. We're requiring universities to be subject to more of our foreign interference and other national security laws, Mr. Speaker. And we've also convened the world's first universities foreign interference task force, and through this have developed guidelines for all of the higher education providers to follow to mitigate foreign interference risks. But, Mr. Speaker, this is an ongoing effort. Our universities have often very strong relationships with universities overseas or with governments overseas, and we want those to continue. But one thing we will never do, and that is to compromise our national security. And so we will continue to work with universities to deal with foreign interference to ensure that our research has integrity.
Concluded. And I call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that Schedule 1, Part 1, Section 66M of his Industrial Relations Bill means that when casuals are refused the right to convert to permanent employment, their only remedy to fix the problem is to go to the federal court?
The Leader of the House and Minister for Industrial Relations.
The remedy for dispute is precisely the same as the remedy for dispute is now under the Fair Work Act that the opposition designed. Right? Exactly the same. Exactly the same. What they would have people believe is that somehow the very strong, consistent, now broadly applicable right to convert from casual to permanent employment, which is enshrined in this bill, is not real or is not enforceable or is somehow not a significant improvement on the situation that presently exists at the moment. It is a very significant improvement to the benefit of workers on the position that exists at the moment. its enforceability mechanism is precisely the same as it is for dispute resolutions that exist at the moment. But more importantly, it is a stronger right to convert. Because what happens at the moment, for the benefits of all of the members of the House, is that some awards have in them a basis upon which conversion to permanency from casual can occur, and that is based on a request from the employee to the employer. What this legislation does is make it a responsibility of the employer to offer that right to the employee. And if they don't, then it is subject to the same dispute resolutions that exist in the present system for all comparative matters. But also, this now applies across the board. So places where there is no right to convert at the moment, no process, no enforceability, such as in the coal mining industry, for the first time ever will have a strong, consistent, soundly enforceable pathway to conversion to permanency. And when members opposite ask us whether or not people will be better or worse off, if you have a strong, consistent pathway to conversion to permanency, you will be better off. If the Labor Party votes against that, you will be worse off. If you have strong penalties for sham contracting, which are in this bill, you will be better off. If the Labor opposition votes against that, you will be worse off. If you have for the first time ever proper civil penalties that mean that there will be less underpayment, you will be better off. If Labor votes against that, you will be worse off. If for the first time ever you have a criminal penalty for wage theft, you will be better off. If the Labor Party vote against that, you will be worse off. If we reinvigorate the enterprise agreement system so there are more deals where people on average get paid 69% more than on the awards, you will be better off. If the Labor Party votes against that, you will be worse off. What they have to do is explain to the Australian people why they would vote against measure after measure that improves people's lives.
Concluded. And I call the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is working to keep Australians safe online, particularly as we spend more time on the internet while working and studying from home through the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister for Communications.
B, who of course is a very strong champion for Australians being safe online and having an entitlement to the same protections as are available offline. And, Mr Speaker, as the member for Boothby has rightly said, over the last year we've seen Australians doing more and more online, with people in their millions moving to working and studying from home. The volumes of traffic over the internet have increased very dramatically. So the internet has been enormously important to our prosperity and our welfare over the past year. But as we know, both online and offline, there will be a percentage of human interactions that go wrong, and it's very important that there are proper safeguards in place. Now, our government has been at the forefront of world efforts in keeping people safe online. We established the world's first Children's E-Safety Commissioner, as it was then known, in 2015. In 2017, we expanded the remit of that office to include all Australians, and we introduced a strong scheme to support victims of image-based abuse. In 2019, we swiftly responded to the appalling spectacle of the live streaming of mass murder in the Christchurch mosque attack by swiftly passing the abhorrent, violent material legislation. And our government is working to make sure that the E-Safety Commissioner has the resources to keep Australians safe online. Our 2021 budget provided an extra $39.4 million over 3 years. In fact, Mr Speaker, in total we are investing over $100 million over the next 3 years on online safety. And shortly, Mr Speaker, we will introduce into the parliament a new bill to establish a new Online Safety Act, following extensive consultation, an extensive discussion paper released and, of course, a promise at the 2019 election to establish a world's first cyber abuse takedown scheme for Australian adults, building on the proven effectiveness of our cyberbullying scheme for children. We will expand the cyberbullying scheme for children to enable the removal of material from a full range of online services where children spend time, such as games, websites, messaging and hosting services, reducing the time frame within which the providers must respond from 48 hours to 24 hours. Mr Speaker, the internet is an essential and central part of the lives of just about every Australian. It delivers enormous economic and social benefits, but people must be safe online. They have a right to the protections of the law, and our government has provided substantial resources to achieve that outcome.
The member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister seriously expect casual workers to lawyer up and head off to the federal court to fight their employer for the right to permanent employment? How many casual workers does the Prime Minister seriously think have the resources to take their employer to federal court, or the confidence that they'll keep their shifts afterwards?
The Leader of the House and Minister for Industrial Relations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Look, the proposition which appears embedded in that question, is that the casual conversion rights in this bill are somehow not enforceable, is just absolutely wrong. The casual conversion rights in this bill are spread right across the field. They are much stronger than those exist at the moment, and they are enforceable in precisely the same way as every other safety net entitlement Labor put into the Fair Work Act when it introduced that Act in 2009. So let me be absolutely clear. Employers who do not comply with their obligations under the new casual conversion provisions will face precisely the same civil penalties as employers who do not comply with other safety net rights like annual leave, paid personal carers leave, paid parental leave and paid public holidays. And I can tell the member that after 150 hours of consultation, employers were not necessarily overjoyed at the fact that they would face all those penalties based on a strong casual conversion system that requires the employer to offer that right to the employee. It was something, in fact, that many of them would have preferred not to have, because it is such a stronger system than exists at the moment. So the premise of your question is absolutely wrong, and the process for resolving disputes about casual conversion under the bill are completely 100% consistent with how disputes in resolution under safety net rights have been dealt with under the laws that Labor introduced in 2009. Absolutely consistent. So completely consistent enforcement mechanisms to those that exist, attached to a much stronger, much broadly applied right for casual conversion. The real question is, why would members opposite call for precisely this over many years, including unions during the consultations, and then have it on the table and vote against it?
The member for Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Housing. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's Home Builder program is supporting employment in the residential construction sector, including in my electorate of Ryan, and how it is helping us to ensure we build a stronger Australia in 2021?
The Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Housing.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Ryan for his question. It was a great pleasure for me to be able to visit his electorate last week and see firsthand some of the outstanding work that is happening in his electorate. And it was also good to see a local member so highly regarded by the tradies on site. Now, he wasn't highly regarded for his skills as a bricklayer, I hate to say it. He makes a much better member of parliament than a bricklayer, but at least he had a go. The Home Builder program, as members in this House should know, has ticked over 83,500 applications. 83,500 applications, supporting 1 million employees, but also and importantly supporting 390,000 small and family businesses. Now, we on this side of the House care for small and family businesses. 390,000 of them have been supported by the Home Builder program, and one of them, Fresh Homes, we were able to visit with, the member for Ryan and I, who took us around 3 projects that he had in this particular development. 3 projects that he introduced us to all the tradies on site, and he told us before HomeBuilder, Fresh Homes was building 20 homes a year. So prior to HomeBuilder, they were building 20 a year, a pretty substantial effort. After HomeBuilder, they are now building 100 homes a year. So from 20 homes to 100 homes. And what does that mean? Members on this side of the House know that just means jobs. Whether it's the bricklayer on site who was trying to teach the member for Ryan how to work, whether it's the carpenters that are on site, these are people that have been supported by the program. Now, sadly for those opposite, all of those tradies on site knew that the Labor Party opposed the HomeBuilder program. Every single one of those tradies knew that the Labor Party stood in the way of them and the HomeBuilder program. But in addition to standing in the way of those jobs, in addition to standing in the way of the residential construction industry, the Labor Party stood in the way of first home buyers, because one of the largest cohorts of recipients of the HomeBuilder grant have been first home buyers. We are a government that is dedicated on helping people get into their first home. We know the Labor Party's vacated the space on helping first home buyers. That's why first home ownership is at its highest level at over 10 years. We're also supporting, as I keep saying, the 1 million Australians who work in the residential construction industry, and it's because of the members on this side of the House, including the member for Ryan, supporting those tradies in their electorate, that this will help fuel our recovery throughout this year and into next year.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Paterson.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that under his News Media Code legislation, media companies have the right to compulsory arbitration, but casual employees will have to get the agreement of their employer before they have access to arbitration?
The Leader of the House and Minister for Industrial Relations.
So the access to arbitration, I'm very happy to explain it again, but the access to arbitration under the much stronger casual conversion
Minister can just pause for a second. The members for Warringah and Newcastle can leave under 94A and continue their conversation outside. McKellar, sorry. Sorry, yes. Sorry, Zali, you didn't say anything. Thank the member for McKellar for owning up. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The access to arbitration, which would apply to the much stronger, much broader rights for conversion from casuals to permanent that are contained in our bill, are precisely the same access to arbitration that exists in all comparable NES matters in the Fair Work Act, which the Labor Party brought into being in 2009. So what you have at the moment is that in some awards you have a current ability for an employee to request conversion to permanent of an employer in some awards, but that does not apply to all awards. For instance, as I noted, one of the awards it doesn't apply to was coal mining awards. The government's bill extends the casual conversion provision to the national employment standards. That means it covers the entire workforce. It's also a stronger provision because the onus is on the employer to make the offer to the employee, not the employee to request. So it applies across the entire workforce. In the NES, a stronger right of conversion, and being in the NES, it is subject to the same arbitration and enforceability provisions that exist and that members opposite created to all other NES matters, and they are enforceable in exactly the same way. So the question is, why would you be looking at a bill that provides a consistent, strong, enforceable pathway for casuals who've worked regular shifts over the last 6 months to convert to permanency and vote against it? That is putting politics above the benefits that can accrue to ordinary working Australians if they want to choose to move from regular casual shifts to permanent employment.
The member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for the Environment. Will the minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is focusing on caring for our country through measures such as tackling waste and protecting, preserving and enhancing our natural environment?
The Minister for the Environment. Member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much.
The Minister has the call.
Can I thank the member for Fairfax for his question and commend him on his leadership on the Standing Committee of Energy and the Environment. One of the strong focuses of the Morrison government is to care for our country, reflecting the deep connection Australians have for our natural environment. We're doing this in multiple ways, from recycling to revitalising our national parks to looking after our incredible wildlife. Australians want to be confident in their recycling, that everything collected is remanufactured, turning into something new, something with value, not buried in landfill or shipped overseas to become another country's problem. That's why this government is leading a $1 billion transformation of the waste and recycling industry that will protect our environment, divert over 10 million tonnes from landfill and create more than 10,000 jobs. We said we were going to ban the export of waste plastic, glass, paper and tyres, and we have. Shortly, I hope to be visiting my neighbour in the electorate of Mallee to see our Recycling Modernisation Fund project, which supports the construction of glass processing and sorting, and again adds to regional jobs. Smith. Mr Speaker, we said we were going to help industry minimise waste and give new life to old products, such as school uniforms and tradie uniforms, and we are. Last week I stood in a warehouse in Macquarie Park with a member for Bennelong with old and discarded school uniforms all around us, listening to new ways that we're turning those textiles, pulling apart the polymers and fibres and turning them into new products such as desks or pet swags or outdoor furniture or indeed new material. And we announced funding to support Circular Threads, a new scheme to deal with the over 31 tonnes per person of discarded textiles a year. Mr Speaker, caring for our country is also caring for our Commonwealth national parks, and the release of the Kakadu Master Plan a few days ago starts an exciting new chapter for Kakadu. We will see new experiences and greater access to these sites, visitor services hubs, new accommodation for rangers and tourists, upgrades to roads, boardwalks, viewing platforms and amenities, bringing this World Heritage Site to the world and to our domestic tourists. We are deeply committed not just to preserving the natural environment for all Australians, but enhancing it for future generations.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper, and in adding to an answer to yesterday in relation to the member for Kennedy, I table a statement from the Secretary of the